Welcome, everybody. Tonight is December 20th, 2018. This is the Upper Dublin School District Operations Committee. We are in the Upper Dublin High School Cardinal Room. I'll call the meeting to order. First things first, we have a presentation on the long-range capital plan. Ms. Bray, Mr. Lester, Dr. Young.
So one of the items that we put together as we start thinking about the future of Upper Dublin is the long-range plan. This is a document that will evolve over time. It's a culmination of some work that had been done previously. It's presented in a different format. And one of the things that is going to be particularly helpful as we talk about this document, not tonight, but moving forward, there's some significant work that needs to be done at our 3 elementary schools, Jarretown, Thomas Fitzwater, and Fort Washington. And I imagine as we move through the rest of this year, we'll have conversations about the amount of work we want to do in those buildings and when do we reach a tipping point when we're renovating a building that may be coming towards the end of its life. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lester and Ms. Bray for the presentation.
So Mr. Lester and I have both practices perhaps as much as we should have. But the table of contents is self-explanatory, and we're going to go through each one of the schools and have some conversation about different perspectives as well as what has been done in the past. One of the things that I don't want us to focus on tonight, but perhaps we need to be thinking about, although we've tried to update the estimates as of 2017, the basic work for this was done back in 2014. So time is passing even on looking at the renovations and the information we have. So capital planning, the mission is imperative that the school district, and everyone can read it and read it at home as well, to craft a coherent plan to protect and preserve the investments that the community has made in schools. It's a blueprint for the future of our facilities, but tonight it's interesting because we're going to talk about what we have in our capital plan, and then later in finance we're going to talk about our long-range financial plan as well. So I'd like for us to focus a little bit on the questions that we are going to talk about as this living document, and that really in the administration we consider almost daily, don't we, Bob? What work must occur in each of our buildings to ensure that the district can sustain a focus on 21st century learning and teaching for the students of the Upper Dublin School District. And from at least the business office and the facilities office, we tend to focus on question 2. What preventative maintenance can occur to ensure that we realize the greatest benefits possible from each of our buildings? And this is particularly true for the high school, our newest building. But then the second question there, what buildings or when must a building be replaced? So while we have a lot of things that have been listed for improvements, the cost benefit of repair and maintenance sometimes needs to be offset with do we need to replace as we're doing at Sandy Run. So with that, Mr. Lester, I'll continue on with the planning goals a little bit. High quality educational setting and opportunities for all students. Address building deferred preventative maintenance needs. We went through a very difficult time, we all remember. It's getting longer ago, but still we did put off some preventative needs, and then plan for a balance between the district's facility needs and the ability of the community to finance the project.
And one of the items I can mention, preventive maintenance, what we're doing in the buildings now, how it relates to each of the buildings, long-term care of the buildings. When I arrived at the district, there were some preventive maintenance practices already in place for the larger pieces of equipment, the boilers, the chillers, continue to those programs, we're maintaining that equipment, one for reliability throughout the school year, but also to extend the life. We've been extending our program, adding to it. One of the items we added this year is preventive maintenance plan for our turf fields, with grooming, vacuuming, inspection of the infill, and actual testing of compaction of the rubber in the fields, so we can extend the life of the turf. We're doing that in all the elementary schools with all the systems. We're evaluating each system as we go along. As systems get replaced, yes, there are more complicated items that we need to plan preventive maintenance for. The high school, of course, right now the equipment has the most preventive maintenance needs. The new middle school will be right alongside. The equipment that we put in Maple Glen, yes, we are going to maintain that to make sure that that is a 25, 30-year chiller for the life of that building.
And if I could, on preventative maintenance, the contract, our new UDETSPA contract allows us to hire the more technical maintenance that we need for some of our more sophisticated buildings and HVAC systems. A lot of things have changed recently. So that's going to be helpful and has already been helpful for the facilities department to address some of our continuing needs.
Some of the items, starting first with the administration building. The building was built, the original building was built 1793. It's had many additions until the final school district addition in 1999 for the district offices. We do have the links here on the needs. Right now, our needs for the not sure if this link is actually working. They're minor items. We don't have them in our capital plan right now. Some of the hardware, the doors, single doors, we can handle with our staff. So we really don't have this in our capital program. But there are items that we look at. Everything currently now is working. There really is no need for us to be putting any items in our capital plan right now for administration, with the exception of our storage space that we're looking at. We hope to have something very soon that we can put on to take the place of an older building that had to be demolished because of its condition. Going through to the other schools that we have. Upper Dublin High School. There's really nothing on the Dewey capital plan for the high school, since the capital plan was built directly after, or the capital plan is developed after the high school was built, so there's really nothing on the list. But we are starting to look at the age of the high school and some of the needs, some of the items that weren't replaced, some of the items that are new. As we get it, there's nothing on the 5-year plan, but as we're going a little further out, looking maybe 2025, 2026, we'll need to start adding some items. But some of the minor things we are keeping an eye on are the stadium, our press box, the home bleachers are a little older than the visitors bleachers, the lighting, sound system, but also condition of our tennis courts. We did some minor patching of the tennis courts a few years ago, and we'll keep an eye on that. Some of the other track areas, we will keep an eye on that. As they need to be added to our preventive maintenance program, we will. And other technologies, such as lighting, there's been so much advancement in lighting that maybe we do look at a program where we can realize savings, overall operational and utility savings. We're not taking advantage of LED lighting for the parking lots. That is an item district-wide we should be looking at in the near future. Significant savings with our parking lots, and we still have some high-pressure sodium lights at some of our schools, along with mostly metal halide throughout the high school. When you count the number of fixtures you have versus the hours that everything is on, there could be some savings. That is something we'll be investigating, but we really don't have a comprehensive plan for the high school at this time. Sandy Run Middle School, annex built in 1965. Main building was built in 1967. With our current replacement schedule, we do not have any capital plans within this building, or both buildings. Later on tonight, that we will be discussing some ADA issues that we've received bids on, items that we're obligated to resolve. So we will be discussing those tonight. And they are not part of our capital plan where operations is funding those changes. Fort Washington Elementary School, built in 1969, it's the newest of our elementaries. We had an addition on the building in 1993. It was 4 classrooms, 5 classrooms that were added to the building at that time. Several things we have been doing updates to this building recently. Past few years, we installed new boilers, new electric service. We're currently working on the window project that we'll be talking about. The roof on this building is not that old. As we get into the 5-year plan, we'll see some more cosmetic items that we're going to be looking at. Some interior doors. We'll be looking at casework through the buildings. Possibly, we're also looking, the window air conditioning is a temporary solution, but longer term we will be diving into what's the proper HVAC system for this building and when could we fund a project like that. They're all items that we're going to be looking into further. Jarretttown Elementary School is the oldest of our elementary schools, built in 1955, had additions in 1965, 1989, 1983. If you walk around the building, it is easy to pick out where the additions to this building were. This building does have capital needs. One item we're looking at to do window air conditioners is probably going to need to do some upgrades to the electric service. Was updated once before, but the main panel board we don't believe is capable of handling additional loads and additional electric panels that we need to put in. Again, in the future for this building, the windows are new, the roof is newer. We're going to be looking at, again, interior doors, casework in the building in the future, possibly air conditioning down the road. And these are schools that we need to take a look at as we develop this plan. Being that it is our older school, do we want to put money into some of these programs? Is this a school that's a candidate for a replacement down the road? Or a renovation? These are all areas that we still need to further develop. We're just not there yet. We're beginning stages of putting this together.
And while we're there, if you were to total everything that is listed, it's estimated to be around $14 million. And just to refresh everyone's memory, when you start doing renovations, at some point you trip that you have to go into ADA compliance. So we'll be looking at what we can add and what we can do. I just want to call everyone's attention to, there's some infrastructure challenges, I'll say, small cafeteria needs some work.
Ceiling heights in this building. Building has lower ceiling heights, makes it difficult to do any renovation work around duct work, electric, but even cosmetically, not giving you a high ceiling has a different feel to it when you walk into the building. Whereas Fort Washington has higher ceilings, more space above the ceiling, so down the road we have more options to work with. So, Jarretttown provides additional challenges that some of the other schools do not. Maple Glen Elementary, built in 1999. Currently, we don't have any large capital programs in the school. We just did the chiller, we did some upgrades to our control systems. The needs that the building has, it really doesn't need the doors, the interior classroom doors and heating system that the other schools need. But we are keeping a look at the windows. Again, this building's approaching 20 years old. We don't need to do window replacements to the entire building, but there are small areas of the building that we know we have to replace 1, 2 window panes here or there just because the seals are starting to go. We're getting the condensation. We're not getting a good insulation through some of the windows anymore. So we'll be addressing those in the future. And one of the things we've been keeping an eye on this building is the roof. You will not see it on when you get to the 5-year plan. It's not on the 5-year plan, but I think in the next year or two that I'm up here doing a 5-year capital plan presentation, you will see it being added. As this building gets to be 24, 25 years old, we will add it in. The roofing contractor we've been doing now has been doing a good job addressing any leaks, he solved most of our problems. Again, I think we talked about before, we switched to a residential roofing contractor with all the shingles. They seem to handle leaks in shingle roofs much better than the commercial roofing contractors do, just because they're working with it every day. Thomas Fitzwater, it's the second oldest of our elementaries, built in 1962 with additions in 1965 and 1990. Very similar to Fort Washington, with some of the projects in Jarrett, some of the projects that we've done in the past. Some of the recent projects we've done, we added a new lobby for better securing the school, for check-in people entering the school that they do not have access to the school without going through our check-in process. This building does have a new generator, new electrical service. The boilers are a little older, but they're still in good shape, so we're not looking at putting them onto our plan at this point in time for replacement. But it's something, again, with preventive maintenance, we better know how long we're going to get out of these boilers. They're running as efficiently as they can. They're in good shape. We'll keep an eye on it. Roof in this building is in good condition. Skylights are another item. This building does have a lot of skylights in it. Provides a lot of natural lighting, and we do keep an eye on any skylights or cracks, leaks, just so we don't have any water damage to the building. Again, down the road, this will be tentative for interior doors, casework that needs to be done. We have started some of the casework, but we've pulled back a little on that project. Figure we'll see a better economy of scales if we're bidding out all the schools at the same time and replace casework instead of doing one classroom at a time. If something pops up that is in poor condition, yes, we will get it.
And if I could add, this is another building that needs a fair amount of food service or kitchen work and equipment replaced. Now, the capital, it's a possibility that the capital project fund could have some help from food service, since we are building a fund balance there. But one of the items, the amount that's listed is over $400,000, so it would have to be perhaps a sharing, but just calling that to everyone's attention.
If anybody's looking at these sheets that were developed in 2014, a lot of the high priority items have been taken care of. We've addressed the security issues, a lot of the infrastructure issues, roofing. They have been taken care of. So we're at some of the lower priority items that we have now. Again, these buildings that we add into some type of energy project, looking at lighting, looking at other efficiencies, building envelopes, that's something we're not ready to make any recommendations, determinations, but it is something in the upcoming year we will be taking a look at. Again, this final statement is prioritize capital plan. We don't want to be doing any of this work in a vacuum, spending money needlessly, projects that would be undone at a later time. We are working with consultants, a wide variety of consultants, engineers, looking at plans that we can do to these buildings that will only benefit and extend the life of the building. It doesn't make sense to do projects now. So we are going to be prioritizing all these projects, what makes sense to work on it. If it's going to be something that we're already going to last a few years and it'll be ripped out on a renovation or rebuilding, of course, it's going to be removed from the project. We take all this into account as we're planning out. Yeah.
So if you were to connect to the link that was just noticed in the 5-year plan, it indicated November. So tonight, Mr. Lester's updated, and we've been talking about planning and the summer work for 2019. So we've made some changes to the sheet, and after presentation tonight, we'll have it be the link.
Yes, this was an updated sheet again. This continues to be updated to something I look at quite often. The link that is on the long-range capital plan linked into a sheet that was only a month old. Yet this week I updated again based on more information that we're learning, Starting to look at 2023 would be the fifth year. Currently looking at the year, the items that are highlighted are items that were completed on this project or for this plan. We did floor replacements in some of the schools. We replaced the chiller and the HVAC controls at Maple Glen, or updated the controls to work with the chiller in some of the classrooms. That project went very well. Had to look at some of these numbers. I think what we have on the plan might be a little high. We actually came in a little lower than this, but I just need to go back through and adjust those numbers. There are some items still that are not highlighted, items that we're looking to do for the spring. The Field of Dreams concession building needs a roof. It's losing shingles. We had the pricing for that. It's just a matter of now getting the purchase order out to get those repairs made. That's, again, going to be based on the weather through the winter. I mentioned the windows at Maple Glen. There's some seals that are broken that need to be addressed. We have money in there for that. And a small item that was on the Dewey engineering list, a dryer vent. We don't like the way the dryers vent in Fort Washington. Our staff will be handling that, getting a better exterior ventilation system for the dryer. The upgrade, the service also for electric at Fort Washington was upgraded, and that number is reflected for 2018. That is an accurate number. In 2009, actually, I should stick with 2018. Anybody who remembers some of the earlier plans that we looked at maybe a year or two ago, we talked about interior doors. We shifted just to maintain working capital. We shifted some of those projects to later years, so we were able to take on the upgraded electrical service at Fort Washington. And also originally some of the chiller work we weren't planning on taking on this year. If you remember, it started at Maple Glen, it started as a cooling tower replacement project, but when the engineer came in, identified the equipment, the age of the condition, the outdated refrigerants that we can no longer obtain, it was determined to go for a full replacement. So we shifted some of our capital to maintain our working capital funds. 2019, the large projects that we're doing are the window air conditioners. That's currently being designed. I lumped everything in. The price for the air conditioners, that includes the electrical work that needs to get done, some window panels that'll need to be installed to add the air conditioners into the windows. Also, the other big project is windows for Fort Washington. And if you notice, that will be split between 2 years. Our architect recommended this is too much work for one summer, and to get the best pricing, split it now. So this will be an ongoing 2-year window replacement project. What we're looking at right now, if you're familiar with the building, the 2-story classroom section of the building will be year 1. That also includes the library. And in the front of the building, the remaining classrooms, office areas, hallways will be the second phase in 2020. So those numbers have been reflected. Now, the numbers have increased. I did increase the numbers. I'll be discussing that a little bit later tonight on some of our updates, what we've been finding as we've been doing our investigations. 2020, we're really stepping back from the...
Before we leave, you may recall that we were trying, when we first put this together, to have about $1.2 million a year as far as capital projects during the summer. I just want to point out that right now it's looking like we're around $1.8 million for the summer of 2019, and close to that again for the summer of 2020.
We do have a $100,000 contingency each year as well. When we get to 2020, again, we're going to be continuing with the windows, but we're going to start to take on some of the smaller projects that need to be done. So it's taking a step back from some of the larger projects. So we're going to be need to spending more time on our sidewalks, our parking lots, some smaller cooling needs, air conditioning for computer rooms, get back to our floor replacement. Our floor replacement is really going to take we're going to back off that for a year or two with some of the floor replacements. So we've increased some funding. We'll be taking that on again in 2020. Right now, again, still for 2021, some of the discussion is cooling larger spaces. Also move the door projects, the interior classroom doors to this year. And this is all flexible, up for discussion. If we don't feel that it's the proper time to be doing air conditioning in larger spaces, we can move that another year and switch this around. So this is not set in stone, as we keep preaching. It's a living document. As we go a year or two out, maybe it makes more sense to move some of the projects around. But right now, this is the year that I chose to place these projects in, so we can continue planning for our capital. And that was the majority of the work that year, was the 3 elementary schools would be cooling the larger spaces such as cafeteria, gymnasiums, and library work that would need to get done. 2022, again, we're taking on many smaller projects. We're looking at replacing boilers at Jarrett Township. Compared to some of the other projects that we've taken on, this would be smaller, but it is a significant amount of money. So we're looking at adding that. And again, looking at some of the computer labs, floor replacements, kitchen equipment. We're looking at the boiler for Jarretttown was in there. Jarretttown also, we looked at some acoustical treatments in the gym. Anybody who uses the gym knows you cannot hear in there. We had numbers in there. They are mostly smaller projects, taking care of floors, windows during those years. In 2023, started looking again at our building control system. These are the controls that controls our boilers, the ventilation units. These are programs and systems that are getting to the end of their life. So we do put numbers in for these items. And also we started adding casework for the classrooms in this. These are the bookcases that are to the sides, not the window bookcases, but the wooden bookcases that are around the room, the countertops that are around the room. Decided this would be a good year to add these items in. And that would be a district-wide with Jarretttown, Thomas Fitzgerald, Fort Washington. I didn't discuss anything at the top of the page yet. We started putting some numbers in, what we expect our expenses to be for Sandy Run going across, looking at construction and winding up demobilization in 2023. One of the new numbers we added was a transportation facility. We marked that with asterisks because we're so early into the process. A lot's going to be dependent on sites that are chosen. Do we go in with the township? Is it a combination building? Do we build our own building? Where? We do it? How big do we build it? But we feel pretty comfortable putting $8 million aside for that, marking it as a number. Based on the square footage, number of bays we need, we figure regardless of whether we're partnering with the township or building on the space needs that we have will give us around an $8 million building. But there's so much to be determined. We just put it as a placeholder right now for 2020, so we know going forward, looking at what funds are available, what we will need if we stick to this timeline. Sums up the next 5 years. Capital. Again, this is flexible as things pop up. We change our capital plan as we identify problems or areas that need to change. This document will reflect that.
And just like the financial plan, we talk about having a 5-year. 3 years, anything really beyond 3 years, it becomes more difficult because of there's just so many variables. But, and that's the reason why the last 2 years, even in what Bob was discussing, we're not as definite about, because we had projects this year that we now need to split over 2 years. It just makes it much easier to concentrate on the next 3, but have a longer term plan. Questions?
Thank you. So if there are questions from the committee or the rest of the board, Dan?
Bob, when you click on the link for each elementary school, it may be you don't question, but what are those letters on top represent? Is they somebody's initials or something?
No, they were different criteria. If you look at, we can put a link to the document, maybe get the front page attached to it. There is an explanation. It's referred to tab 8 in the latest plan con. it will give what these numbers. It's really they're talking about safety, efficiency, comfort, and it's how they come up with these priority numbers, energy efficiency. So we can give a link to what those abbreviations are.
That's an excellent point, Stan, because at Eastern, we have a similar study being done by Dewey, and what we did at Eastern was we looked at safety as one of the key areas that we want to identify. So we were looking, I think SA is the safety
I
component.
believe so.
So we really focused a lot on safety and instructional. So what would directly benefit the students? I'm not sure which of those initials represent that, but we really focused on safety and instructional benefit. Some of the other items we didn't look at much, but for safety, you don't see too many high. I didn't see any 6s or 7s because we have addressed a lot of the safety issues already. Where we have some 6s and 7s at Eastern.
I was going to comment on that as well, that something I'd like to see in the long-term plan is something about strategy for prioritization. A rough guideline, life safety issues are clearly number one. Educational impact, as Art said, is clearly high. Just a general strategy thing, and part of that strategy is something we've discussed in the past that you discussed as well tonight, Bob, is whether we do a little bit piecemeal or try to do whole buildings at a time or try to do whole systems across multiple buildings at a time and that kind of thing. Just as a general guideline for future boards to understand the process by which these decisions are made.
Yeah. And another item I do want to point out, you see some asterisks along the category. What that is there were some numbers. They may look like duplicating numbers. They're not. That's one number maybe if you decide to replace an entire system in one building at one time versus piecemealing it. There's a number for replacing an entire HVAC system. We're looking at maybe just our larger spaces or the classroom spaces, maybe broken out. So you may see it may look like duplication. If you see the asterisk, it's because you have the opportunity. There's numbers in there to do it all at once or to break it up into separate projects.
I think another important point that I'd like to make, so that it's clear. I think it's clear already, but just to make it really overt, is that doing this work simply out of the revenue that we're currently receiving is not going to be possible. So when we look at increased development in our district, i.e. the promenade and what have you, that money I would imagine that we'll be asking the board to earmark for specifically for long-range capital projects. So we wouldn't be looking at increased revenue from the promenade to go to fund things such as salaries and other items. We would be looking at it specifically for capital needs.
Thank you. That dovetails nicely into my next comment, which is the funding strategy for these things. And there is a slide at the end that we didn't really talk about, but it's understandably thin. But comments like that would be helpful to have in here as well, because we need to know not only what needs to be done and how we're going to prioritize them, but how we're going to pay for them. Part of the goal of the document, really, I think, thank you, is to document our confidence in our ability to do all these things. So we can say down the road, it looks like we're fine. We can see, even 5, 10, strategically speaking, without fine detail, it looks like we have a strategy in place that will last us for a while, that will help fund these projects, or we don't, and we'll have to make adjustments. But we need to document that as part of the list. It's not just about what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it.
And that flows directly into talking about the 5-year financial plan and some of the variables that we'll be looking at later on in finance. But one of the pieces that Bob and I discuss almost weekly, things are changing. For example, the LED lighting that he talked about, that may be an emergent way to save money and a change that we hadn't considered certainly not in 2014 or 2017. The air conditioning project that we're now working on and funding. That wasn't identified in one of our earlier projects. So there's going to be things that emerge that we're going to need to address as well, to be flexible and, again, one more time, a living document.
Yeah, the document does say at the top that it's a living document. I think we should carefully emphasize that we know that this document is wrong. But it does provide a framework for the way in which decisions are to be made for the future and some expression of confidence or lack thereof in our ability to cover them.
And I want to go back and repeat that it may be time also to strip this out and maybe have another set of eyes to start looking at priorities and other things moving forward, because some of the costs are getting stale and old.
That sort of gets into a question I had. You're using the 2014 DOE things. Is there anything being added aside from that, or are things being taken off? And when do you expect to do another round of a list like this one, or planning 5 to 10 years ahead of where we are now?
Most of the items that we've been finding have been in this list, but yes, we have reached the point where we will start needing to adding items to our capital plan that are not on this list, especially when you look at the high school. I have been talking to Brenda, we've been discussing different ideas, how to update this, different consultants that we know of that are in this business. Where do we want to go? I think relatively quickly we'll have some recommendations.
We need to get the summer work plan for 2019 and a little bit further along at Sandy Run. But again, Bob and I have been talking about bringing in some professionals and perhaps looking at contracting visa. We want to talk about different ways of funding and how they might be applied. But that's just a preview for something we'll be looking at in the spring, I think.
Okay, and along those lines, you mentioned the high school. Is there a timeline for that, to put the list for the high school on there, or is that TBD?
Right now it's TBD. With the other projects we have going on with Sandy Run, I don't see that occurring anytime before the summer.
I have 2 short questions. When you're talking about doors in Fort Washington and some of the other schools, you mentioned cosmetic. Is there also a safety concern about that, or is that purely cosmetic?
It's a combination. It really is a combination. A lot of it's cosmetic. We have almost every elementary school or any school built within the time frame that ours were built had the same exact classroom door, mostly glass windows. They're not falling apart, but the hardware has become obsolete. The old lock cylinders that were mortised into the door are no longer available. So if we have to change a lockout now, we end up having to put a plate on the door and wrap it. So it is a combination now. A solid wood door with a smaller window, definitely safer. I wouldn't say our doors are unsafe at this point. We do keep an eye on the door itself, and we are preventing people from getting into the building. I think we've done an excellent job on the envelope of the building for keeping anybody to get in. But we are confident on the level of protection that we have. Right now, somebody were in our building.
And then perhaps a suggestion, when you have your sheets for each building, for me personally, it would be really helpful if when something is done, it gets sort of a line through it, just to say, hey, it's done, we did this, because otherwise we keep sort of looking at the same material and just actually seeing some of that progress, I think could be.
Yes, we do have that. It just wasn't ready to be shared at this point, but we have been doing that on a working copy that we've been working with.
And then, if I may, one more question real quick. The windows at Fort Washington, when you're saying you do the second part in the following year, does it include the new building or the new section, that hallway at the very front, which is a newer hallway, and I wasn't sure if that was included in the whole process?
The windows, the exterior windows that are in the hallway, yes, we were still looking at doing those. We can make that an alternate depending on what the cost is. I believe we do have that as an alternate on this bid at the cost of the classroom windows, no, we're not looking at replacing. The windows themselves, the frames are in good condition. What the problem is, the rubber seals are bad. It's a very repairable condition. That is in this bid. I believe we have it in for the summer that they will go in and repair the seals on those windows.
Anyone else? Joan?
Since we're putting window air conditioners in all the classrooms now, are we really, other than air conditioning the large group rooms, have we really taken off the table, a full air conditioning? Or delayed that pretty far out into the future because there's many other things that are more important? It's just
Right now, it's a delayed, and when you start adding that into cost of other projects, is that what needs to be discussed? Does that push you over the edge of what's a good value for a renovation? Should you start looking at going? They're all items that we really need to dig into in the future, so that's why you don't see it on the short-term plan right now.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. I think that presentation is a good start. I don't think it's really complete and answers the question originally until we have some of those things added that we discussed here. And I know it is coupled with the long-term financial plan that we're going to discuss at finance tonight. But together, those things need to come together in some documented way to express the confidence or lack thereof that I was discussing earlier. That's really the ultimate goal of this, for the board at least. I realize you have other reasons to want to do this as well, but that's the specific piece we're looking for. All right, let's move along. Are there any announcements, Ms. Bray?
Not this evening.
Okay, and we have minutes from our November meeting. If anyone has corrections, please get them to Brooke. Let's move on to the Fort Washington Elementary School window replacement update. And you've already covered part of that.
I did cover part of that. I just want to give you some updates as we're moving along with. This has been a very fast-moving design bid development project that we've been working on. We are out to bid right now. We have interest, several vendors. Our architect and myself, we've reached out to every window installer manufacturer that we can find in the area, including some out of state that we know do work in this area. So we're trying to drum up as much support for this project as we can to get the best pricing. There has been one development on this project. As we're finishing up our drawings, we're looking for some detail work. So the architect wanted some more detail how the outside panels, the panels that you see below the windows, tie into the heating system. The thin tube radiation runs along. So we wanted to make sure there wasn't any hangers that we're going to miss. It's going to make this project more difficult. So we actually took apart some of our casework in one of the classrooms to get to the back side of the panels. What we found as soon as we started taking apart the panels, we missed the back side of the panels below the windows in the classrooms appeared to be transite, which is, if you remember the old asbestos siding that you had on the houses, that very hard concrete siding, that's what the panels resemble. So we brought our environmental consultant out, Element Environmental. They took some samples, which did confirm it contains transite. They're concrete panels that contain transite. So we will have to treat those panels differently. They're not friable. We don't have to worry about airborne. So it is a very simple process, but it will give some increased cost. Our consultant, Element Environmental, also told us if you walk down the hallways and you look at the other windows, even in the lunchroom, you see it's the metal panel on the outside, the metal panel inside. They pretty much guaranteed us that if we had transite on the inside of the classrooms, that there's going to be transite sandwiched between the two aluminum panels on the windows that you cannot see. So again, they're putting together a removal for us. So basically, it's going to be a combination demolition. The window contractor will remove all the glass, the framing, and they just won't touch the panel. It's a very simple process. All that has to happen is the second the asbestos regulated contractor would come along, they would just remove the panel and put it in a separate dumpster. They just have to be the ones licensed to touch it, so it won't be the window contractor. So it will be a separate contract that we'll be getting pricing on. Not a significant contract like replacing the windows, but it's enough that I do want to mention that tonight, which is part of the reason I did increase the number. I added $100,000 to each year. We don't know how accurate that number is at that point, but it's a good placeholder that I wanted to bring up tonight. We're still working on that. It's not going to delay the project. The architect was able to work that into our specifications and the notes on the blueprints that the window contractor will be moving on the glass and framing during the day, and not to exceed more than 4 classrooms at one time. After they're finished for the day, the asbestos contractor will come in and remove the bottom panels, and so the next day they can start installation. A very simple process. We're not talking about all the decontamination levels that you see when we do the floors or insulation. It's just a solid material, but by law it has to be handled properly.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember having to do that when we did the siding on my house. So are we surprised that in all the asbestos investigations that have been done in all the buildings over the years that those panels haven't been identified as asbestos panels in the past?
No, because it required taking apart existing equipment. It actually resulted, we were looking to make sure we didn't have any insulation on the pipe. We could see down from the top, we knew we didn't, but our architect, he was really being diligent and looking around, making sure that everything was covered on this, which is why he insisted that we take apart some panels on the casework. Fortunately, we found an easy way to do it. This all started with him looking, just pulling a piece of molding off and sticking his camera in with his hand and taking a picture. When he pulled his hand out, I said, "What does that look like to you?" He said, "It looks like a translate panel." So we worked on taking more access after school. Each day we figured out an easy way to get to it, brought the contractor or environmental consultant in to confirm that's what we were looking at. So I think this was a case of an architect doing very due diligence on his work that discovered this. I'm not surprised that it wasn't found in earlier documents.
But we feel very fortunate that it was found at this phase and not when we started the work and not had it planned for it. So, while when Bob told me about this, I went, oh, the cost of the project is going up, but still the inconvenience of finding it at that point in time would have been far greater than dealing with it now.
Any comments or questions? Dan?
Yeah, Bob, you're saying that the asbestos was used as, not as insulation, but as like a vapor barrier?
It was probably more for insulation purposes. You never would have seen it until you taken the panel out, because the panels that are exposed were metal faced front and back. The ones that you see in the hallways, the cafeteria, the teachers' lounge, they're all metal panels front and back. It was probably a cost saving measure as they were building the building. Why do we need to put an aluminum panel to cover the translate if we don't see it anyway? And back then, they weren't concerned about the hazard. They were more concerned about the translate panels being brittle and breaking. So, which is why they recovered with the extra piece of aluminum.
So we're just taking out the panels below the windows?
The panel below the window will be removed the same way it would have been removed by the window contractor. It'll just be a different contractor handling it because they are licensed to handle asbestos containing material.
Would the panels be replaced with the windows or with other
Yes,
panels?
it was all scheduled to be replaced as part of the window replacement. So the window contractor will make that part of their panel that they were replacing to begin with.
Mhm.
So the only thing changes is who actually takes it out of the frame and puts it in the dumpster. Is all that will be changing.
So you're saying,
And where the dumpster is.
would it make sense for the glass, people who remove the glass also be qualified to handle that asbestos there first? We only need to have one contractor versus two?
No, most contractors are not certified to handle the asbestos. They contract that out. So they would sub it out anyway. They don't have people licensed and trained to handle asbestos containing material.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. Next up, ratify an agreement for the Cobalt investigation at Sandy Run.
As part of the sampling of the soil, the testing that's been ongoing for Sandy Run, one of the things, they need to test the soil to see if it meets the clean soil standards for disposal, which determines how easy it is for you to ship it to another site, what landfill it goes to. They found that we did have cobalt in our soil. So what this investigation does, they'll determine whether or not they're finding cobalt throughout the site now and how it leaches out of the system. What that's going to determine is this a naturally occurring cobalt, or is this something that was added to the soil through the years? Odds are we're going to find this is something that was naturally occurring, but it will regulate if it's naturally occurring. It'll change how this is handled with the clean soil standards. It'll make it less expensive for us to dispose of than if it was determined that the cobalt was added because of some farming process or agricultural process that occurred on the property before we ever owned it. The cost of this work was $9,860 was the additional cost of this work.
Take the samples.
Correct. That was to take the samples and do the recording.
Of course, the weather hasn't helped with getting this done. One of the reasons for signing it and moving forward was to get it accomplished. And I believe we've had some delay due to the rain.
Is the cobalt, is it a type of salt? You're saying coming from, perhaps from fertilizer, or is it, you know?
Dr. Young has more background. It is an element. It is an element that it could be naturally occurring, or it could have been added through a process, an agricultural process through the years.
I'll have you know, when I brought up cobalt in an internal Sandy Run meeting, everyone around the table looked at me like I was crazy, except for the engineers. Cobalt is typically in this geographic area naturally occurring, and southeastern Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania in general has lower thresholds for cobalt levels than any other state in the country. And one of the things that is really important is to have the soil tested now so that we can have an idea if this soil can be moved to a clean fill. We believe it will be, but we want to have that assurance now because it's very, very expensive to move soil to other protected sites.
Do we have an idea yet of the level of financial risk there if they determine that this is not naturally occurring cobalt?
Not at this time.
All right, let's move on. We just opened some bids for Sandy Run.
Yes, these are all projects that we need to complete for ADA compliance issues. It was an ADA locker changing area. We needed to add a stair lift in the stairway next to the gymnasium. Yes, as everybody knows, there is a ramp alongside the gymnasium. On first appearance, the slope is correct for ADA guidelines, but the length of the ramp was too long. It was about 10 feet too long, so there was no resting area midway. So the only way we could come into compliance would be with a lift. And then we're looking for another toilet area that meets ADA guidelines, which would be easier for students who need to use this an ADA restroom. Be easier, so we're adding that restroom. Walter Brucker Company was the low bid on this project. They came in under, I think we had about $250,000 budgeted for this work. They came in at $174,800 for all three items. Looking at some, I did pricing on stair lifts before this became a larger project, and their numbers are right in line with what we were seeing using our own contractors. So very confident in their pricing. Walter Brucker did the renovations at Thomas Fitzwater, the lobby renovations that are well known for schoolwork in this area. We've had good experience with them.
And because we want to afford the company the opportunity to go ahead and get product ordered and equipment, we're planning, I would ask that maybe we have a special meeting on January 14th just for this one item for approval then, rather than waiting until the end of January 28th for the approval. So it'd be, I believe, right before the education committee. And again, we'd limit it to one item and just get it approved so we can award the contract.
Comments or questions? Stan?
You said there was already a ramp there, and you said it's too long by 10 feet because there's not a resting area?
Correct. It's not in the same hallway, it's a different hallway, so there would be a different travel path. So not only does this stair eliminate the length of the ramp, the non-compliance of the ramp itself, but it also eliminates some, I guess the nicest way to say it is some inconveniences. If a student needed, it was in one of the classrooms, in the industrial arts classroom, some of the other rooms that we have right in the area of the gymnasium. The only way to get up to that ramp would be cutting through gym class, or cutting through the gym, which could be during a gym class or some type of event. So this would provide a better way for the student to get up that level.
But it's not required, right?
It is required.
I'm saying the ramp is required. If there's a rest area, is there room enough to extend that ramp?
No, that's it. There were either through the ramp or through the stairs is for how we would make our requirements. Because of the ceiling height, we actually did look at that. That would have involved moving the gymnasium doors about 15 feet down the hallway, removing the ceiling, removing the pipes that are above the ceiling, and reinstalling the ceiling. Because you don't realize the ceiling slopes down with the ramp. And to make those additions, that would have been significant cost.
Basically, how many steps is this ramp gonna
Six
replace?
Six steps.
6 steps, and it costs $30,000 or whatever?
Yes, for the type of lift that this is. The good thing about this lift, if we need it anywhere else, we are finished with it at Sandy Run. It is an item that we can relocate.
And can be extended?
Yes, it rides on a track, so if we need to use it at a different location, all we have to do is purchase additional track.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so I think the board, this committee is amenable to moving that to a special meeting to vote on. Yes? Yeah, Art? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So we'll move along. And I don't know that we explicitly said so, but the same for the contract with Advantage Engineers. Everyone's okay with moving that along to the next legislative? All right, update on the transportation facility.
So we have been doing what I would consider our due diligence in looking at all options for a proposed transportation facility. At this time, there's still data that we need to collect, and there's properties that we still need to visit. And so I'm recommending that we not have, or that we not discuss any options at this time, but do so in the winter, moving forward after we have a little bit more time to go and view several more properties and have more conversations about some of the options in the township.
Comments or questions? Okay, so we'll look forward to future updates. It is time for community input. Yes? All right.
Sure.
Since I'm here on this dreary night and should be at a cocktail party, figured I'd ask questions. Jenny Vidal, Ambler. I want to thanks finally for our windows. I wish Joe Chomelsky was here. So Joe, if you're watching, thank you finally, right? The windows, my windows have been asking for, I think, 5 years. So thanks about that. It doesn't surprise me that the prices have increased at all since we keep using the numbers from the Dewey Engineering report from 2014. I think that's unrealistic really to pay attention or to even use those as a guide. Like now, I feel like those prices should be constantly updated within reason. I think still $100,000 as a window. I mean, we're spending $175,000 on ADA compliance on a building we're about to tear down. So $100,000 like window on that planning, that long-range 5-year plan, just never seemed high enough and still remains. I also think that 1.5 million to 1.8 million in these improvements is just too low. I mean, I don't see, with this report to me, look like the exact same thing that we've had, except for now it has pictures attached to it of the buildings that we know and the history of the buildings, which we also know. So I don't see a vision, and I was hoping for when on that Sandy Run Project Review Committee, when we were wanting a long-term capital plan before we did a Sandy Run project, it was, part of that was a vision. It was like, what is our vision? Are we gonna do big capital projects in these buildings? Are we gonna piecemeal, so when we plan to tear down a building, we still have to dump $175,000 into it? I just don't see a vision here. I see the checklist, and I like Titia's point that the cross the lines out, and when are we looking at that plan again? It's 2014, and I feel like we're looking at the same 5-year plan with some moving, which is fine, but it's not a vision, and it's not a long-range plan of what's happening to these buildings and what we look to as a district, what we're gonna do with these buildings. Are we gonna piecemeal and do Fort Washington and fix this or add this, or I'm just pointing to Fort Washington, or what school, or anyway, long-term vision is more what I was looking for. This is the same old in a prettier form, I guess. I think what Titia was actually asking about the windows of Fort Washington, which I wrote down here, is she wasn't talking about the windows on the connecting hallways, but rather the windows that on the addition done in the kindergarten hallway are from 1993. So that the hallway did have Mr. Farina's room, Mrs. Young's room. That's why I went to kindergarten. So I know that's been around since '67. But the other side of the hallways newer from 1993, and I guess you were talking about those windows, whether it be replaced, not the hallways. They're all glass that just got film done on them 2 or 3 years ago. And when replacing those windows, I know, we have that 1970s green on those, some of those aluminum. So when you're talking about aluminum, will the green be going? And if so, who's picking the color? Let's not make it green again. Anyway, happy holidays to all and happy New Year.
Thank you. Yeah, will they stay green?
We have not picked a color yet. We do have samples now, and it definitely would not be green. We're looking more what's available, and they're more neutral-based colors, what's going to match with the stone. We've yet to pick those, but to mention, those green panels will be going because they are the panels that contain the translated material.
And with the clarification on which windows, the newer 1993 windows in the kindergarten hallway?
The newer 1993 windows, they will be staying with repairs. We're going to look at the operators, but that's where we have the problems with the seals. The architect looked at the windows. We brought one of the window contractors in to look, and there's no efficiencies to be gained by replacing them. You're not going to get a better window. If anything, if we ever did anything to those windows, we'd probably reduce the operability. Right now, each of those classrooms has 12 operating windows. We'd probably reduce that down to 4 if we were to make that change. But right now, there's nothing to gain with the frames, the windows, other than replacing the seals. We do have some drafts. The teachers complain to get dust onto their window sills for when the wind blows against that building because of dust off the playgrounds. So replacing the seals will take care of any inefficiencies or dust coming into the room.
Okay, and Jenny's comment about the document not including a vision as in the examples, will we do big capital projects or do them piecemeal? That's the kind of strategy, I agree with Jenny, that's the kind of strategy thing that I think the document needs in addition to what it has today. So things like, we envision this building, you talked about it, 1955 Jarretttown, it's our oldest building, it has low ceiling, it has a bunch of issues, that can be documented in there and saying it may not make sense as a result to do piecemeal renovations. So that building, maybe not, maybe I'm making this up, maybe, fits, that's more realistic. And those are the kinds of things that could be in there that would give us a sense of, yeah, we're going to replace this building and 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever we think, or we're gonna renovate it, or we're gonna just continue to do piecemeal maintenance, or something around there needs to be in there, so that kind of detail. And of course, it's tied to finance, yeah, Joan.
So this is just a comment on the long-range plan. It is more format than content. So listening to the description of what was needed in each of the buildings, I get the sense that all that is in both of your heads. But as a listener or reviewer of it, it seems like to me it would be really nice to have kind of a summary of those comments that you made when you talked about each building, like at the bottom of the page. Okay, we have the electrical is good, the roof is good, some of the things like that. You got hints at one of the buildings looking like it would end up being more a replacement than a renovation and the others not, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what you intended. But that would help just in reviewing it as a reader.
Anybody else? Oops.
However, part of that, when you start talking, at least on my experience, raising a building needs to be a conversation, because people react emotionally. It's easy for Bob and me to sit in my office and say, yeah, we're putting $30 or $20 million into that building, we're still going to have an old building when we get done. That's easy for us to say, but we need to talk about it in public and start having, I think, conversation. If you want administrative or our recommendations, probably, I'm happy to write that down, but I also do not want to start a firestorm.
So what I really intended was not to put things that are not, that don't make sense. They're, like the roof is 20 years old, and in the next 5 years we're going to need to replace it. Things that not so maybe back off from things like, do we need to replace it or renovate it, because those require a lot more analysis. So just a little summary that's,
The underlying facts that go into that conversation, like, there isn't a lot of room between the drop ceiling and the actual ceiling, limits future expandability of things like HVAC. That's a fact. You don't have to say, and therefore, right?
And we understand it, but when you have a list of probably 10 to 12 things, people will start having conclusions. But I certainly understand what you want, and it's a good point. We didn't put in there, we have worked on roofs over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, actually longer than that, close to 8 years. So most of the roofs, other than Maple Glen, which we did mention tonight and is in our brains, are in good shape. So we'll try to start putting together some of those bullet points.
All right, anybody else? Okay, thank you. So our next Operations Committee meeting is scheduled for January 17th, right here in the Cardinal Room at 6 p.m. And we are adjourned. We'll take about 5 minutes to reset for finance.